Hello, in this video I'll show you how to solder wires and electronic components. Soldering is joining metal elements with the use of a filler material. The filler material, called solder, is melted and forms a joint between two elements. A typical solder is made of 60% of tin and 40% of lead. As lead is considered as a neurotoxin, lead-free solders are commonly used nowadays. They contain tin and silver or copper. The melting point of lead solders are typically lower than lead-free solders. Commonly used soldering temperature for lead solders is between 300 and 350 degrees of Celsius, and for lead-free solders from 340 to 370 degrees of Celsius. Solder additionally contains flux, which cleans the joint and makes soldering easier. Thickness of a solder is also important. Typically, thickness for electronic components is 0.5 or 0.7 of a millimeter. To solder, you need a soldering iron. In general, there are two types of soldering irons, with and without temperature control. Soldering irons without temperature control are cheap and lightweight, but also have some drawbacks. They can heat up to very high temperatures while used for prolonged time. To get a lower maximum temperature, you can use a soldering iron with a lower power, like 20 to 30 watts. But this will also increase time needed to heat up the tip of the soldering iron. On the other hand, soldering irons with temperature control, sometimes called soldering stations, give a way better results and comfort of soldering. You get a stable, electronically controlled temperature, so you don't have to bother about overheating. Power of such devices is also typically higher, which shortens time needed for heating. High-power soldering irons are also recommended for soldering large elements, thick wires or large pieces of metal, which can easily distribute heat. While working with electronic components, it is also crucial to have a soldering iron which is ESD safe. The last thing you need is a damp sponge or metal cleaner for cleaning the tip. You should clean your tip frequently to keep it in a good condition. Before we start soldering, a few safety precautions. While soldering, you should always wear safety glasses or goggles. Solder, especially with a high concentration of soldering flux, can hit your eye during melting. Such glasses can also protect your eyes while cutting components leads. Soldering iron heats to very high temperatures, so you should never touch the metal components of a soldering iron. Soldering iron is an electric device, so use it with caution. Always inspect the power cord and provide a proper grounding if needed. You should always work in a well-ventilated place. A small fan can also help to extract the fumes. Wash your hands after soldering. So now let's get started with soldering. At first, you need to set the temperature. For lead solder, you can start with like 320 degrees of Celsius, and for lead-free solder with 350 degrees of Celsius. Wait until the tip reaches the desired temperature. While soldering electronic component, you need to put it in place. Then you heat up the lead of the element and the board without applying any solder. After a while, you touch the solder to the place where you want to make a joint. The solder melts. Soldering process should not take longer than a few seconds, otherwise you can damage a component. Moreover, prolonged heating causes the flux to evaporate, and the soldering can become more difficult. Now you should clean your tip with a sponge or metal cleaner. You should never use a sandpaper to do this. To learn how to solder, it is good to buy some cheap components like resistors and universal circuit boards. Joints should be smooth and should not be bulky. While cutting off the component's leads, you should avoid cutting the joint itself. Similarly, you can join wires. In such case, sometimes it is good to use an additional flux. At first, you have to twist the wires. Then, you heat up the wires and apply solder. Such joint is very durable. Now you know how to make a nice and clean solder joint. Thanks for watching.